on China's economic performance in 2018.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's press conference. Today, it's our pleasure to have with us head of the National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Ning Jizhe. He will be sharing with you the economic performance of China in 2018, and he will be happy to take your questions. Now I'm handing over to Mr. Ning Jizhe. Mr. Chair, friends from the media, good morning. In 2018, the economic performance is within the reasonable range, and we have completed the set target of development. Over the past year, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Xi Jinping as the core, all regions and departments implemented the decisions and arrangements made by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, adhered to the general guideline of making progress while maintaining stability, focused on the vision of new development, high-quality development, supply-side structural reform. We stayed united and overcame difficulties. As a result, main goals for economic and social development were achieved. The three critical battles got up to a good start. Supply-side structural reform was advanced, reform and opening up was deepened, and people's livelihood continued to improve. The national economy performed within an appropriate range, sustained the momentum of progress in overall stability, and strived towards building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. According to the preliminary estimation, the GDP of China was 90.0309 trillion yuan in 2018. 90.0309 trillion yuan. An increase of 6.6% at comparable prices over the previous year, achieving the target of around 6.5% growth for the year. Specifically, first quarter, 6.8%, second quarter, 6.7%, third quarter, 6.5%, and 6.4% for the fourth quarter. The value added for the primary industry was 6.4734 trillion yuan, up by 3.5% over the previous year. Secondary industry, 36.6 trillion yuan, up by 5.8%. Tertiary industry, 46.9575 trillion yuan, up by 7.6%. First, grain output maintained high yields and production of animal husbandry grew steadily. The total grain output was 657.89 million tons, down by 0.6%, but still a harvest year on record, and above 650 million tons for 4 consecutive years. Summer grain was 138.78 million tons, early rice 28.59 million tons, autumn grain 490.52 million tons, cotton 6.1 million tons, up by 7.8%. Planting structure was further optimized. The sown area of quality rice further increased, and the sown area of corn continued to reduce. The cultivated area of soybean increased, and that of cotton, sugar, crop, and Chinese herbal medicine plants increased. The total output of pork, beef, mutton, and poultry was 85.17 million tons, slightly down by 0.3%. Specifically, pork was 54.04 million tons, down by 0.9%. Beef, 6.44 million tons, up by 1.5%. Mutton, 4.75 million tons, up by 0.8%. Poultry, 19.954 million tons, up by 0.6%. There were 428.17 million pigs registered, decreased by 3%, and 693.82 million pigs slaughtered, a decrease of 1.2%. Second, industrial production developed steadily with fairly fast growth of new industries. The real growth of total value added of the industrial enterprises above the designated price size in 2018 was 6.2%, with slow yet stable growth. That of state-holding enterprises was up by 6.2%, collective enterprises down by 1.2%, shareholding enterprises up by 6.6%, enterprises funded by foreign investors or investors from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan up by 4.8%. In terms of sectors, mining grew by 2.3%, manufacturing by 6.5%, and production and supply of electricity, thermal power, gas, and water by 9.9%. High-tech manufacturing, the strategic emerging industry and equipment manufacturing increased by 11.7%, 8.9%, and 8.1%. 5.5 percentage points, 2.7 percentage points, and 1.9 faster than that of large enterprises. New emerging industrial products registered fast growth. Passenger trains, microwave terminals, new energy automobiles, biologically based chemical fibers, smart TV sets, lithium-ion batteries, and integrated circuits grew by 183%, 104.5%, 40%, and 23.5%, 18.7%, 12.9%, and 9.7%. In December, the total value added of large enterprises was up by 5.7%, 0.3 percentage point higher than that of last month, or up by 0.45% month-on-month. From January to November, the profits made by large industrial enterprises stood at 6.1169 trillion yuan, up by 11.8% year-on-year. The profit rate of the principal activities of the industrial enterprises above the designated size was 6.48%, 0.16 percentage point higher than that of the same period last year. Third, the service sector sustained fast growth and maintained within the range of expansion. The index of services production increased by 7.7%, maintained comparatively rapid growth. Information transmission, software and information technology services, and rental and business services grew by 37% and 10.1%. In December, the index was up by 7.3%, 0.1 percentage point higher than that of last month. From January to November, business revenue of services enterprises increased by 11.5% year-on-year. Strategic emerging services, science and technology services, and high-tech services increased by 14.9%, 15%, and 13.4%. The operating profits of large service enterprises increased by 5.7%. In December, the business activity index for services was 52.3%, within the range of expectation. Railway, transportation, telecommunication, broadcast, television, satellite transmission services, monetary, financial services, insurance, and other financial services stay within the expansion range of 60.0% and above. In terms of market expectation, the BAEI for services was 60.2%, 0.6 percentage point higher than that of last month. Fourth, market sales witnessed steady and fast growth, and the share of online retail sales increased markedly. The total retail sales of consumer goods reached 38.0987 trillion yuan, up by 9% over the last year, which kept fast growth. Consumer goods by enterprises above the designated size stood at 14.5311 trillion yuan, up by 5.7%. In terms of areas, in urban areas reached 32.5637 trillion yuan, up by 8.8%, and in rural areas stood at 5,535 billion, up by 10.1%. In terms of patterns, the catering industry was 4.2716 billion yuan, up by 9.5%, and goods reached 33.8271 trillion yuan, up by 8.9%. Upgraded consumer goods witnessed fast growth. The growth of sales of cosmetics, household appliances, and audio-video equipment and telecommunication equipment by large enterprises were 3.9 percentage point, 3.2, and 1.4 percentage points higher than the growth of large retail sales of large consumer goods enterprises. In December, the total retail sales of consumer goods grew by 8.2%, or 0.55% month-on-month. The online retail sales reached 9 trillion billion yuan, an increase of 23.9% compared with that of last year. Physical goods were 7.0198 trillion yuan, up by 25.4%, accounting for 18.4% of the total retail sales of consumer goods, or 3.4 percentage points higher than that of last year. Non-physical goods were 1.9867 trillion yuan, up by 18.7%. Fifth, investment registered slow but stable growth, and the growth of investment in manufacturing and private investment accelerated. Investment in fixed assets was 63.56 billion yuan, up by 5.9%, and 0.5 percentage point higher than that of the first three quarters. Private investment, 39 trillion yuan, up by 8.7%, 2.7 percentage point than that of last year. Primary industry grew by 12.9%, 1.1 percentage points higher than that of last year. Secondary industry grew by 6.2%, 3 percentage point higher, among which manufacturing grew by 9.5%, 4.7 percentage point higher. Tertiary industry grew by 5.5%, among which infrastructure grew by 3.8%. High-tech manufacturing and equipment manufacturing went up by 16.1% and 11.1%, 6.6 percentage points and 1.6 percentage points higher than that of the investment in manufacturing. In December, investment in fixed assets grew by 0.42% month-on-month, almost the same growth rate. First 11 months and in December, almost the same. In real estate development was 12 trillion yuan, up by 9.45%. Floor space of commercial buildings sold was 1,716 million square meters, up by 1.3%. For residential buildings, 2.2%. For commercial buildings, 14.99 trillion yuan, up by 12.2%. Sales of residential buildings were up by 14.7%. Six, total value of imports and exports hit a record high, and trade in structure continued to optimize. The total value of imports and exports was 30.5050 trillion yuan, up by 9.7%, setting new record by topping 30 trillion yuan for the first time. Total trade achieved the set goal of stable and positive development. Total value of exports was 7. Consumer price rose smartly, and growth of producer prices for industrial goods declined. In December, consumer price went up by 2.1%, stayed within the mild growth range, lower than projected annual growth target around 3%. 8. Employment maintained stability, and surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas dropped. Newly increased employment people in urban areas totaled 13.61 million, an increase of 100,000, stay above 13 million for 6 years in a row. The surveyed employment rate in urban areas was 0.9%, 0.1 percentage point lower than that last year. The monthly urban surveyed unemployment rate stayed within the range of 4.8% to 5.1%, hitting the projected target of lower than 5.5%. In December, the urban surveyed unemployment rate in 31 major cities was 4.7%. The total number of migrant workers reached 288 million, 1.84 million more than that of last year, up by 0.6%. Local workers totaled 115 million, up by 0.9%. Outside migrant workers totaled 172 million, up by 0.5%. The average monthly income of migrant workers was 3,722 yuan. 9. Resident income and consumption grew steadily, and the growth of income and expenditure of rural residents outpaced that of urban residents. The total income was 28,000 yuan, a nominal growth of 8.7% over the last year and real increase of 6.5% after deducting price sectors, higher than the growth rate of per capita GDP and basically in pace with economic growth. Permanent residence for urban households with 39,000 yuan, a nominal growth of 7.8%, a real growth of 5.6%. For rural households, 14,000 yuan, a nominal growth of 8.8% or a real growth of 6.6%. There was the 2.69 times between urban and rural areas, 0.02 less than last year. The median of the nationwide per capita disposable income was 24,000 yuan. And the nationwide per capita consumption was at 19,000 yuan, a nominal increase of 8.4%, 1.3 percentage points higher than that of last year. 10th, the supply side structural reform was advanced further, and economic kept its momentum of transformation and upgrading in terms of overcapacity. The national industrial capacity, the annual tasks of cutting capacity in steel and coal were completed. And in terms of deleveraging, the asset liability enterprises was 56.8%, 0.4 percentage point lower than the same period last year. State holding enterprises was 59.1%, 1.6 percentage points lower. Inventory by the end of last year, the floor space of commercial buildings for sale was 524.14 million square meters, down by 11%. In terms of lowering costs, the cost of enterprises continued to drop. The cost for per 100 yuan turnover of principal activities of large enterprises was 84.19 yuan, 0.21 yuan less. In terms of weak areas, investment in weak areas grew steadily. The investment in ecological protection and environment and pollution agriculture went up by 43% and 15.4% or 37%. Economic structure continued to optimize. The contribution of the value added of a tertiary industry was 52.2%, 0.3% higher than last year, 11.5 percentage points higher than that of secondary industry, contributing 59.7% to GDP growth, 0.1 percentage point higher than that of last year, was a major driving force for economic growth. Final consumption expenditure contributing 76.2% to GDP growth, 18.6 percentage points higher than that of last year, and 43.8 percentage points higher than the growth capital formation. Household consumption was upgraded. The Angles coefficient was 28.4%, 0.9 percentage point lower than that of last year. Service consumption took up 44.2% of nationwide per capita consumption expenditure of residents, 1.6 percentage points higher than that of last year. Green development was promoted steadily. Energy consumption over 10,000 yuan worth of GDP went down by 3.1% over the last year, achieving the target of dropping by 3%. Energy consumption structure continued to optimize. Clean energy such as natural gas, hydropower, nuclear power, and wind power in total energy consumption was 1.3 percentage points higher than that of last year. 11, population increased steadily with continuous growth of urbanization rate. The total population of mainland China was 1,395.38 million, up by 5.3 million over the last year. The number of births was 15.23 million, and the birth rate was 10.94 per thousand. Number of deaths was 9.93 million, with a death rate of 7.13 per thousand. The natural growth rate was 3.81 per thousand. Gender, male population was 713 million, female population 681 million. The sex ratio of the total population was 104.64. Urban areas 821 million, increase of 17.9 million, and rural area 564 million, decrease of 12.6%. Proportion of urban population to the total population was 59.58%, 1.06 percentage point higher than that of last year. And The floating population stood at 241 million, 3.78 million less than that of last year. Generally speaking, the national economy performed within an appropriate range, maintaining general momentum by pursuing progress while ensuring stability. At the same time, there are also concerns and changes, and external environment is complicated. There are still downward pressure. The problems emerged in the course of development should be addressed specifically. In this year, we will be guided by the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era as the guideline. We should seize the opportunity in the important strategic period, follow the guideline of making progress while maintaining stability, stick to the new development philosophy, high-quality development, and focus on the supply side structural reform. We will win the three critical battles, endeavor to stimulate market vitality, demand potential, and internal dynamism, ensure steady economic growth, advance reform, make structural adjustment, improve living standards, and guard against risks. Micro policies should enhance counter-cyclical adjustments. Structural policies should focus on institutional construction, and social policies should guarantee the basic line of living standards. We need to ensure the sustainable and healthy development of the economy and protect stability of the society, and lay a sound foundation for the building of a morally prosperous society in all respects, and celebrate the 17th anniversary of the founding of the PRC. Thank you.
Thank you. Please identify your affiliation and your name before you ask any questions.
谢谢主持人，我是中央广播电视总台央视记者。刚才从您讲的这个发布词里面，我们已经看到了，2018年呢，经济保持住了一个。
You can see that economic performance has sustained a momentum of steady progress. But we have heard that the judgment by the central leadership used words such as changes and worries. Perhaps I would like to ask you to introduce your views on this. What are the progress? Where are the concerns coming from, and in what direction will it go? Thank you for your question. As you said, in 2018, despite a complex international and domestic environment, our economy operated with stable progress. The main set targets for economic and social development were met. It's mainly reflected in the following areas. First, the first aspect is the economy operated within a reasonable range, and the goals for macro control were achieved. First, the economy maintained medium-high growth, and the economic aggregate reached a new high. In 2018, GDP grew by 6.6% year-on-year, hitting the set target of around 6.5%. This rate made China the fastest growing one among the world's 5 major economies, and contributing nearly 30% of global growth. China continued to be the largest contributor to global economy. In 2018, China's GDP aggregate exceeded 90 trillion yuan, nearly an increase of 8 trillion yuan from the previous year. At the annual average exchange rate, economic aggregate reached $13.6 trillion at the second place in the world, and our share in the global economy continued to rise. Second, the prices increased lower than expected, and the consumer price rose mildly. You can see that CPI rose by 2.1%, lower than the 3% projected target. Third, urban employment continued to expand, and the number of new jobs increased by a large margin. More than 13 million jobs were created in 2018, and the monthly urban surveyed unemployment rate was kept around 5%, and in recent months it was lower than 5%, hitting the target of lower than 5.5% that we set for this year. Fourth, exports and imports had steady and sound growth, and the international payments were balanced. Total export and import exceeded 30 trillion yuan for the first time in 2018. Trade in goods hit a historical record, the biggest scale in the world. The trade structure continued to improve. General trade accounted for a bigger share of total trade. Exports of electric and mechanic products also saw its share increase. In 2018, our foreign exchange reserve were kept above $3 trillion and RMB exchange rate were stable. Second aspect is supply-side structural reform continue to make progress, and our efforts to cut over capacity have made efforts. For example, M2 to GDP was down by 2.3 percentage points, and outstanding local government debt was 18.29 trillion yuan. We have made good progress in reducing poverty. In 2018, population in poverty was lowered by 60 million. I think the accurate number will be out in the future. 2.8 million people were relocated in an anti-poverty campaign. About 280 counties will be graduating. We made good progress in energy conservation and pollution control. Energy intensity continued to drop. In 2018, for energy intensity was lowered by 2.1%, and the good air quality was recorded for 79% of the days for the major cities. The PM 2.5 was 39 per cubic meter. So these are our efforts in these three critical battles. Third, supply-side structural reform continued to make progress, and our effort to cut overcapacity, reduce inventory, deleverage, lower cost, and strengthen weak links continued to see progress, as I introduced in the opening remarks. We completed the task to cut overcapacity ahead of time. We used market-oriented, law-abiding means. Steel capacity was down by 30 million tons, and coal down by 150 million tons. We made steady progress in deleveraging. Macro leverage ratio was kept stable. Micro leverage, if you measured by the asset liability ratio of large enterprises, it was down by 0.4 percentage points. Reducing inventory efforts were paying off. Floor space of commercial building for sale was down by 650 million square meters. And in the last 2 years, it was down by 180 million square meters. We have also made effective efforts in reducing costs. Burdens reduced for enterprises and households were exceeding our expectation, as we expected 1.1 trillion, but now we reached 1.3 trillion. Our efforts to strengthen weak links intensified, and companies' performance improved. Profits rose by 11.8% for big enterprises. The third point is the economic structure continued to improve and new drivers are stronger. Investment and consumption's relations are more reasonable now. I know you talk about the contribution of final consumption to economic growth, and now it is 76.2%, more than 18 percentage points higher, and 33 percentage points higher than the contribution of gross capital formation. Private investment also grew at a faster pace. Industrial structure continued to improve. The service sector as an anchor of the economy is more prominent. The value added of the tertiary industry accounted for 52.2% of the total GDP, 1.8 percentage points higher than the previous year. Inside the industries, we are now moving towards the medium high end. In 2018, high value added of high-tech industry was 11.7% higher, 13.9% of our large enterprises. Value added of equipment manufacturing was also growing faster. Agricultural structure is also improving, as shown in the zone areas, but we have maintained that the grain output was stable. New businesses, new products, and new forms of business flourished. Emerging strategic manufacturing and services were also rapidly growing. Optic fiber, smart TV, NEVs were also growing very fast. Online retails grew at over 20%. Fourth, major scientific and technological outcomes kept emerging. Beidou #3, the first seismic monitoring satellite, the bridge between Hong Kong, Zhuhai, and Macau, and other projects were the examples. Fifth, reform and opening up were intensified with growing vitality in our economic development. Reform entered a deep stage in priority areas. The business environment had markedly improved in 190 economies, as in the ranking of the World Bank in terms of doing business. China was up by 32 places. The number of newly registered enterprises was up by 10.7%, an average of 118,000. The fourth census of total population has been completed. We are now seeing that the results show businesses registered are much more active than we expected. Taxation and fiscal system reform continued. VAT reform covered the whole nation. Reform of SOE, state-owned assets, prices, and investment financing continue to make steady progress, and we continue to improve IPR protection. Second, we continue to open up to the rest of the world. We attracted a lot of foreign investment against the backdrop of global decline in cross-border investment. The foreign investment we attracted was $13.5 billion. Our outbound investment continued to grow. Business interactions with Belt and Road partner countries continue to expand. Total export between us, non-financial investment were faster than our total exports and imports and non-financial investment. People's lives continued to improve as income and consumption grew rapidly. As I said, household income grew in place with GDP. Per capita income grew by 6.5% faster than the GDP growth. GDP grew by 6.6%. Rural-urban income grew faster than urban-rural income, urban income. Mid-income group exceeded 400 million. This is the biggest number after the 18th Congress of the CPC. Second, household consumption continued to increase in tandem with GDP. Per capita consumption expenditure was growing at 6.2%. For rural residents, it was 8.4% faster than their urban residents. Consumption structure continued to improve. Anger coefficient was 28%, lower than the previous year. For OECD countries or developed countries, it's usually below 30%, and now we have reached their level. Service consumption continued to grow. Domestic tourists and tourism revenue grew by over 10%. Film box revenue also grew at about 10%. But we should also see that there are changes and worries amid a stable economic performance, and the change mostly come from an external environment. As you can see, that there are many uncertainties in the world in the past year. There were fluctuations in terms of the financial markets, commodity prices, global decline in investment, the rise of trade protectionism and unilateralism. China is now the second largest economy, and foreign trade accounted for 1/3 of our economy. You can see global uncertainties are having an impact on the global economy, and there are changes from the domestic side too. The structural problems that are long-seated are still very prominent. In our economic transformation and upgrading, there are pains that come with them. From these changes, there are difficulties, challenges, and contradictions. Amid these changes, we are seeing downward pressure on the economy. We can see that GDP growth slowed. It is expected in such a complex domestic and international environment. We have ensured that the economy operated within a reasonable range that is hard-won, and the problems must be paid attention to. The Central Economic Work Conference has made clear plans and instructions for our work in the coming year. We should be aware of the changes and worries. We should also see that despite the challenges and difficulties, there are opportunities. China is still at an important period of strategic opportunity. In particular, we need to harness the opportunities at this period. At the same time, we need to work on the existing problems and take targeted measures to cope with them. In terms of macro policy, structural policies, we need to focus on institution building, and social policy needs to make sure that basic needs of the people are met. Under the firm leadership of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, we have a clear guideline for economic work, and we have the support and efforts of all regions and departments and people across the country. We have every confidence, the ability and the foundation to maintain stable economic performance within a reasonable range for 2019. so as to bring more benefits to the whole Chinese people. Thank you very much.
第五排这不男士，外国记者对，第五排对 ，OK。
谢谢我彭博新闻社的记者。If it's okay, I'll ask my question in English. My first question is about the concerns you mentioned. Can you specify what are the specific concerns you see about China's economy, and how much of that is the trade and economic dispute with the United States? And my second question is about the unemployment rate. That rose to 4.9% at the end of last year, but there's been a lot of reports about companies like Foxconn laying off workers ahead of time. We heard last week that the NDRC is seeing migrant workers going back to their hometowns early for Chinese New Year. Do you think that 4.9% is an accurate reflection of the unemployment situation in China? Thank you.
您好，我有2个问题。第一个问题是关于您刚刚所说的变中有忧，请问这些忧虑是来自哪些方向的呢？其中有多少是来自于美国的贸易战？第二个问题是关于失业率，您刚刚提到去年年底的失业率是4.9%。那我们也看到很多的媒体报道，比如说富士康在年前的时候有大规模的解雇现象。另外，国家发改委也表示说是农民工提早回家过春节。所以，请问4.9%的失业率是否能够准确的描绘中国的失业情况？谢谢。
你是那个彭博新闻社的是吧
Are you from Bloomberg?
啊，是彭博的。哦，彭博新闻社是国务院新闻办发布会的
Bloomberg
常客
is a frequent visitor at
接受过
such
彭博新闻社的采访。
conference, and
你刚才
I
说这个
was
变中有
interviewed by
忧
you
是吧？有多少是来
previously,
自
and
中
you
美
asked
经贸摩擦？
about the worries and how much of that come from the trade frictions with the United States.
二季度开始吧，
Well, last year, since the second
这
quarter,
个中美经贸摩擦这个
China
初见端倪。
and the United States started to
呃，
witness
在
escalation
经
of
贸
trade
摩擦
frictions.
这个面前，是吧？
In
中国
light
政
of
府啊
that,
也是及时
the Chinese
采
government
取啊
took
6个稳的
prompt
这个对
measures
策，
to maintain stability in
稳
6
就业
areas: employment,
这个稳外贸，
foreign trade,
稳这个外资，稳投
foreign
资
investment,
啊，这个稳预期
expectations,
等等，是吧？应该说啊，
etc.
中美经贸摩擦对经济运行
China-US
影响
trade dispute, it is fair
确
to
实是
say that
是吧？
it is affecting
影
China's
响
economy.
总体
That is true,
可控。
but the
那么
implication
这两
is
天发布的
manageable.
这个进出口
Recently, we
数据
released
也
data
表明
on China's imports and exports,
那么从
and the
中国
data
经济运
shows
行的数据是吧来看，
that in terms of China's economic
大家
performance,
一般都认为，四季度受到
the
国
common
际
view
形
is
势
that
影响要大
in
一
the
些。
fourth quarter,
我
the
在这
China's
里啊，我
economy
想把
was
这个
affected a bit
12月份
more
的数
by
据
the
啊，
international
跟大家
environment. So
再
here I want
分享
to
一下，是吧？
share with you the data
过去
of
2个月，
December.
我们
In the
经济
past
的主
2
要指
months,
标
the
确实
major
是有升
economic
有降，
indices
总的还
have
是缓
witnessed
中
ups
趋
and
稳。
downs, but there is
以
overall
12月份
stability.
为例，虽然
In December,
进出口的指标
import
是吧
and exports
全年是增长很强
for
劲
the whole year grew
，12月
strongly,
份当月
but in
是有所
December,
回落。但
the
12月
total
份的
figure
投资、消费、
was
工
down
业
a bit.
服务业
Investment,
等主要
consumption,
指标，
services,
或
and
者是持平，
industrial
或者是
sectors, the
也有上升，总体是稳
indexes
定的。
are
比如说12月
almost
1
at the
至12
same
月的固
or
定资产
rise
投资额同比增长5.9%，
slightly.
与1至
Fixed
10
asset
月是持平的。
investment grew by
12月
5.9%,
的社会消费品
almost the
零售
same
总额
as
同比增长
January. The
8.2%，
retail sale
比10月
was
份还加快了0.1个
up
百分
by 2.8%,
12月的工业增加
8.2%,
值同比增长
and output of
5.7%， 比
industry
10月
was up
提
by
高了 0.3%。
12.7%,
服
up
务业
by
生产指数
5.7% on a
12月同比增长
month basis.
7.3%， 比11月加快了
Services
0.1%。
grew by
12月的
7.3%.
制造业的 PMI
Manufacturing
是有
PMI
下
in
降，
December
但
was down a
非制
bit,
造业的
but
商务活动指数
non-manufacturing
上
commercial
升，
activities
服务业还是处于
grew.
一个
So for the
比较高的位
whole
置。
service
建筑业的
sector,
指数
its
是大
performance
幅
is good, and the
上升。
construction sector
啊
witnessed a
所以
strong
说到这个
increase.
经贸摩擦，
So China-US trade dispute is hurting both economies and other economies in the world. In general, we have managed the difficult situation, and we have been making progress. China and the United States stand to benefit from the cooperation, and we will be hurt if we engage in confrontation. To follow up on the consensus of our two-president meeting in Argentina at the end of November, the two working teams have engaged in intensive consultation, and we've seen progress made in the discussions between the two sides. Continued progress is good for China, for the United States, and the whole world. I've noticed that on the other side of the Pacific, the good news is generating good development in terms of market prices and other areas. So today, we still witness globalization trend. The Chinese economy is integrating more deeply in the global economy. Our trade is over $63 billion. So the mainstay of our relationship is win-win cooperation. There is still good potential. At the same time, we need to see that the Chinese economy is driven by internal demand. Consumption contribution, together with investment contribution, contribute more than 100% to China's GDP. The net import contribution is negative, although it increases pretty rapidly. And there is still big room to open up more potential of the Chinese market. The trade dispute has not and will not change the fundamentals, and the Chinese economy is resilient and has the resources to overcome the difficulties. So the fundamentals are still there and remain unchanged. This is the answer to your first question. On unemployment, before the year before last, we relied on registered unemployment rate. And starting last year, we released surveyed unemployment rate. It has been trialed for 5 years. From the distribution of samples and methodologies of calculation, we followed ILO standards, and our figures can represent the full picture of China. Compared with European countries, in terms of methodology, well, ILO is widely applied in European countries. So we are applying international standards, the same as the United States and Japan. The United States may be more accommodative in this area. You mentioned the 4.9% figure in December. For the United States, it was above 3%. Its GDP growth rate is 3% at maximum. For China, our economy grows at 6.6%. For European countries, the surveyed employment rate is averaged at 8.9%. For some countries, it is above 10%. While their economy grew by about 2%, the Japanese economy, its economy grows by about 1%. Its unemployment rate may be the lowest among developed countries. So if we look at things internationally, we see a clear picture. Well, you mentioned some specific reports. It is true. It is happening in certain individual industries, but foreign companies, large companies are still entering the Chinese market, some with investment of over $10 billion. So for multinational companies, they are continuing to enter China, and that will result in a shift of or transfer of employment and re-employment, whether in coastal areas in China or mid and western provinces in China. Some companies, they do face a shortage of hand and skilled workers and professional personnel. So the structural problems in employment remain prominent. Some of the cases you mentioned will be taken into consideration, and we will continue to implement pro-employment policies to ensure that people will have jobs, sufficient jobs, and they can have income and have a better living standards. Thank you.
China News Service. It is estimated that in 2019, the external environment may be more severe, and some international organizations revised down forecasts for Chinese economy. So, what is your forecast of China's economic growth in 2019? Will it have a high beginning but flatten out? We are now in 2019, so everybody is watching closely how China's economy will grow in this year. We have noticed that some international agencies revised down global forecast, including that of China and other developed countries. In terms of China's economic development, indeed the external environment is more complex and grave in 2019. Internationally speaking, there are uncertainties and destabilizing factors in terms of trade or investment, protectionism, unilateralism, populism, which are now on the rise. Domestically, structural problems are still prominent. But in the whole, we should be aware of the problems and challenges, but we should also see hope and opportunities and bright prospects ahead. For 2019, there are challenges but also opportunities. It will trend toward stable growth, and we have the foundation and confidence and ability to ensure that our economy operates within a reasonable range and secure a sound momentum of economic growth. You need to put things into perspective when you look at things. The global economy is slowing down. In such a backdrop, China is the biggest contributor of global growth. As for the monthly or quarterly changes of the economic indicators, there might be some fluctuations. It is normal. No need to be overly concerned. The key is to look at the performance for the whole year, look at the trend, the direction that it is going. You always need to look at the overall trend to have an accurate reading of things. In the world, globalization, IT application, and diversity continue to be the defining trend of the world. In a few days, the World Economic Forum will convene. I think they will talk about trade protectionism and unilateralism. Many people will speak out, especially people with vision, will continue to cement consensus on multilateralism. Peace, development, and cooperation remain the call of the day. In terms of China, China continues to be and will be at an important period of strategic opportunity, and there are sound fundamentals for long-term economic growth. This has not changed. that China is still in the primary stage of socialism. This condition has not changed. China is still the largest developing country and has strong latecomers advantage and big room for development. As we address the contradiction of unbalanced and inadequate development, there will be more space for development, allow us to improve the quality of development and support medium-high growth of the economy. There are sufficient favorable conditions supporting that. First, there are new opportunities presented by the changes in the world and in China. China is engaged in win-win cooperation with other countries, and there is more space for China to participate in the reform of the global economic governance system. As we improve and upgrade our economic structure, enhance our STI capability, deepen reform and open up, speed up green development, the opportunities abound. Second, China has the most promising consumer market in the world. As I said, our population is nearly 1.4 billion. In particular, we have the largest and the most promising mid-income group in the world. The mid-income group, my bureau has done some internal estimation. In 2017, the mid-income group's scale exceeded 400 million. In 2018, the number will increase after we do the internal estimation. Our standard is that is now being formulated. For an average household of 3 people, the annual income should be 100,000 yuan. I want to say that that means about 140 households belong to the mid-income group who can afford decent housing, vehicles, and high-end tourism. Consumption provides strong support for continued sound, steady growth. There are high-income group and low-income group in addition to the mid-income group, of course. As people's income increase, consumption environment improves, and product quality improves, the market potential will be further unleashed. Third, China has a rich foundation in terms of material technology and human resources. After 40 years of rapid development, we have a relatively full-fledged industrial system. Improving infrastructure and a rich foundation in terms of material wealth. And in particular, human resources represent the primary driver of economic growth. We have 900 million working age population. More than 700 million of them are in the labor market. A few years ago, 170 people have received higher education and vocational education every year. More than 8 million students graduate from college. There is still demographic dividend in China. Labor participation can further grow. The dividend from the talents is now taking shape. These provides profound intellectual support for high-quality development in the future. Fourth, dividend from reform is unleashed at a faster pace. Last year marked the 40th anniversary of reform opening up, and China is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. Reform is the primary driver of economic development. Fifth, there is big space for macro policy, and we are now getting more experienced. Inflation and fiscal deficit are relatively at a low level, and we have ample foreign exchange reserve and a big room in terms of macro policy maneuver. This year, macro policy will focus on counter-cyclical adjustment and will continue to implement proactive fiscal policy and prudent monetary policy with appropriate intensity. We have enough tools at our disposal in terms of macro control, and we have rich experience in doing that. You can see that 20 years ago, when during the Asian financial crisis, how China handled the crisis and managed the economy. No matter how things may evolve in the international landscape, we have the support, the backing of an industrious and intelligent people, very capable leadership, and rich experience. We will be able to turn challenge into opportunity, overcome the difficulties, and turn the downward pressure into drivers of growth to secure steady progress in the economy and aim for high-quality development. Thank you. CGTN. Throughout 2018, consumption growth was stable, but there are worries about downgraded consumption. What is your view on this? And we have also noticed that consumption in Q4 decreased from 78% to 76%.
Well, this year, consumption contributes more to GDP growth than last year. You may mention the figure for the fourth quarter, which was slightly lower than the third quarter, just down by one bit, by a little bit. Statistics came out after serious calculation and survey, so a little bit of fluctuation doesn't mean there is a qualitative change. So in general, for the Chinese people, they have more income, and the consumption structure on the whole is being upgraded. Based on internationally applied standard, for example, the angle coefficient, how much you spend on food and other necessity, the angle coefficient has been declining. Non-food expenditure has been rising, and that reflects the overall upgrading of Chinese people's consumption. So this is based on international standards. And we have surveyed households in order to come up with that figure. And there is electronic accounting and records. Almost 60 to 70% of the national consumptions are recorded electronically. In middle and western part of China, we have heard the view that we have undercalculated the income of farmers. Another important trend is that commodity or product consumption is being upgraded. What is more popular is cost-effective and high-quality goods, but at the same time, luxury products are more and more common in Chinese households, as we can feel. People are going for higher-end products. Service consumption continues to grow, and the trend is very clear. I've mentioned high-end or premium tourism, and we have provided some data. the total income, and the number of tourists have been growing by double digit. Not only people are traveling across China, but overseas, and a large number of people are traveling to Macau, Hong Kong, and other parts of the world. Every year, over 120 million visits are made overseas. Well, the day before yesterday, I returned from a trip to Egypt. A lot of Chinese people, when they visit foreign countries, they like to pay a visit to museums. In winter, they like to go to Middle Eastern countries where the weather is more agreeable. But I hope more Chinese people will make more trips within China so that we can make sure that Chinese provinces can get the benefit. And also in terms of cultural products, information consumption, training, and input in education, healthcare. Chinese people's spending in this area is growing rapidly. We still don't have very comprehensive statistics on those numbers, but we are looking into how we can better calculate consumption, which will include consumption on services. The consumer goods, the index is consumer goods. There is a catering services included, but just this one. For healthcare and cultural products, they're not included. Even so, the increase for 2018 is 9%, and which is not a low growth rate. We want to have a high-speed growth rate, but medium-high growth rate is good enough. 8 to 9% is good. 6.7% internationally is good. I have met with my counterparts in other countries. An increase of 6% would raise a few eyebrows. So across the Chinese society, of course, the high growth rate is good, but better quality, better efficiency, and return are what we focus on more. And the trend of upgraded consumption continues. We hope that we can use that to optimize our production. Sometimes we cannot produce enough to meet the demand, but consumption can drive investment, can lead to improvement of infrastructure, and there are a lot of other benefits, but this requires continuous and detailed input and efforts. But all in all, consumption is playing a basic role in driving forward the economy, and we need to continue to leverage that. Thank you. Next question.
谢谢主持人，我是那个美国国际市场新闻社的记者。
U.S. international news, market news. CPI was lower than expected last year. For December, CPI and PPI were weak. So what is your analysis of these trends? What are the risks of deflation? Another question is that you mentioned that macro policy should strengthen counter-cyclical adjustment. Could you elaborate on the factors that we should factor in this? In December, prices, according to media, we were back to about 1%, but before that we were 2%. So in December it was around 1%. Both CPI and PPI were relatively weaker in December compared with the whole year 2018. PPI was 3% 2018 and CPI was around 2%. That trend was expected by businesses. There are many factors contributing to CPI increase, and most importantly, supply and demand. Agro product supply in China is sufficient. As I said, grain output was stable. There are different types of ownerships in agriculture. There are increase of agro output, and industrial products is seeing greater equilibrium too. Many industrial outputs are in oversupply. We are now focusing on improving the quality so as to better meet the demands of consumers. So behind the prices, it's supply-demand relations. A careful analysis of this relationship will give you a clear analysis of prices. Supply-side structural reform has changed some industries which were having too low prices, something that companies do not hope to see. And also China has become a major country in exports and imports. We are affected by commodity prices in the world. As you can see in Q4, energy commodity prices were at a high level throughout the year 2018, but at a low level in Q4, which reflected on our PPI. There will be more uncertainties in the future. We cannot look only at the domestic market. There are media reports that talk about the risk of deflation. In the past decades, I want to say there was no comprehensive deflation in China. There were no structural reasons for that, for deflation. For the year 2019, for the year 2018, I would say deflation wouldn't be an accurate description. We need to look at it in the overall economic context of China. The mild increase in prices were normal. No increase was not normal. Prices are on the surface. Behind these are the changes in supply and demand relations, and that is related to your second question. Macro policy needs to address the structural problems, the main problems, but also take into consideration the balance in supply and demand. When the economy is under downward pressure, counter-cyclical adjustment is very timely to offset the pressure. Take some structural measures. In terms of supply-side structural reform, we want to consolidate the momentum and foster new growth areas, which will help improve relations between supply and demand and address the structural problems in the economy. At the same time, overall equilibrium,
那么现在的政策
overall
取向
steadiness
很明
in
确，
demand
继续
should also be
实行
taken into consideration.
积极的财政政策和稳健的货币政策。
The overall situation is good that is attributable to the proactive fiscal policy and prudent monetary policy.
适度，是吧？那么要
Monetary
点呢
policy should be
这个加力
conducted
上
at
面
an
就要
appropriate
加力就
intensity,
体
and
现
the
在
key
实施
for
更
us
大规模的减
is
税
to
降费，
intensify
较大
tax
幅
and
度
fee
的
cuts
增加地方政府专项债券规模，
and increase the
进一步
scale
增加
of
中央预
bonds by
算内
local
投
governments,
资的规模，
continue to
重点支持
increase investments,
补短板。
and focus on
提
strengthening the
效呢
weak
就体
links.
现在要提高
We need to
财
improve
政
the
资金的配置
efficiency
效
and
率
return,
和使用效益，
the efficiency of
这
fiscal
个财政
expenditure,
部门都做
etc.
了这个部署，对吧？
The fiscal
刘昆部长
authorities are
也
doing
接
that.
受了这个采访。那么稳健的货币政策呢，松紧适度啊，包括
Pro-
保持流动性合理充
monetary
裕，
policy
保持
should
货币
be
信贷
conducted at an
及社会
appropriate
融资规模
intensity to
合
ensure
理
that
增长，
social credit
按照深化供给侧
grow at a
结构性改革
stable
的要求，优
rate,
化融资结构、信贷结构，
improve the
加大
investment structure and
金融
financing
对民
structure,
企业的支持，是吧？
and give more
进
support
一步疏
to
通货币
private
政策传导
enterprises.
机制，
Continue
使资
to
金呢
make sure the
更多流入实
transition
体企业，
channel
流入
for
中小微企业，提升
money
金融服务
entering
实
the
体经
real
济的
economy be
能力，
more smooth.
是吧？应该说，这个政策的取向十分
The
的
policy
清楚。
orientation is very
谢谢。
clear.
好，
Thank
因为
you.
时间关系，我们
For
最后两个
time's
请
sake,
好吧，
two more
第六
questions.
排这位李师队。
谢谢主持人，凤凰卫视的记者。
Phoenix
关注到的
TV.
是这个人口总量的这个数量。我们
We are
看到这
looking
个
at the
全年出生人
total
口是已经
population,
连
the
续
number of
第二年萎
births
缩。那另外这个人口
shrank
出
for the
生率
second
和这个
year,
人口自然
and
增长
the
率都已经
natural
是
growth
创下了
rate
近50-60
hit
年来的一个新低啊。
a
想问
low
一下您
at
宁
the
指导
last
您怎样
5 to
看待
6
这样的趋
decades.
势？那么
What
人
is your
口
view
增长率
on
的
such
这
a
个逐渐下
trend?
滑，是否也意味着中国的经济增长的人口
Population
红利
growth
会
rate
提前消失？
is shrinking. Does it mean the disappearance of
人口
dividend of
的 数
demographic?
据啊，这近一个月来始终是大家是吧？
Well, I know
关
that
注是吧？
there's a lot of
有一些
attention
个
on
人的发表的
the
研究文
data
章
concerning China's
认为
population,
出现所谓
and there are
负
some
增长，但是
articles
这个数字我们
pointing
公
out
布的
the
国
negative
家统计局公布数
growth
字
of
已
the
经很清
population,
晰
but
的
as you can see,
表
there
明
is a
是吧？
clear figure
中国
in the data
过去
just
一年
we just
不仅人
relieved
口
released.
正增长，
Last
是吧？
year there was a positive
出生人口呢，
growth
数量也是比
in
较大的
China's population, and there
，1500多万人呢。
big number
想想
of
现在
new
孩子
births,
都是
15
宝
million,
贝啊，是吧？虽然里边有相当比例是二胎，是吧？
and a lot
这
of
带动
the
多大
new
的这个
babies
消
born
费，
were the
是吧？
second child of
这
the
当然是
family.
祖国的未来
Think
啊，
about
是
how
吧？
much they consumption they can generate
这个数
and
据啊
how much they
还是
represent the
很可
future
观的。
of China's development.
至于这个
So we still
人口的
see big
增长率、
increase in
出生
China's
率
birth rate,
有所下降，这人口的数
but
字它
the
不
growth
是看
rate
一
is
年的，你
moderating.
看了这么多年下来，
But we
是
need
吧？
to have
我
a
们历史上有过人口的高峰，
historical
那
view.
么
In the
现在呢
past, there
这
was
个人口的结构
at
变化，
times
它也是自
a
然而
boom
然
of the
才是发生的，
Chinese
是吧？
population, and
所以
in recent years there
也
there
不
might
必
be
为
some
这
declining
个个别点的
trend in the
这个什么
population
过度
increase. That is
叫做
just
过度的解读吧，
natural.
过度解读，
I would advise
它这个人口结构它
against
是
over
是吧？
interpretation.
随着这个发展，经济社会的发展，
Along with
会发
economic
生
and social
我刚才
development,
前
there
面
will
已经
be
讲到，
changes in
是吧？
population.
我们人口的红利
But as I
仍然存
mentioned,
在，是吧？
we still enjoy
劳动力资源
demographic
9亿人
dividend.
呢，
We
是
have
吧？当然
900
你刚才也
million
说到这个劳动力
working
那个
age
是吧？也
population.
会有一些波动，但这个巨
Of
大的规
course,
模，
the figure
我们国
change
家最头
from
疼的
time
还
to
是这个劳
time,
动资源怎么
but
就业，
the biggest challenge
我们这
facing
个
the
就业
country
的
is to
这个
provide
劳动
sufficient
力参与率啊，
employment for
在
the
世界
working
上
age
是吧？
population. The
不算
labor
低的，是吧？
participation
我
is
们
not
有
low
7亿多
in the world.
这个
We
在
have 700
9
million
亿人当
people
中，是吧？
currently being employed
这个
out of the 900 million.
大家一算，这个参与率不对，但是还
So
有
the
空间的，
participation rate is
还有
big,
更多
but
的
there is still
参与
room
率。
for
在
improvement.
日本，大家
We
希
still
望
need to
妇女
increase
也
the
更多的参
participation
与，
rate.
是吧？
Japan
我们
is promoting
男女
women
平等，是吧？
participation
所以参与率
in
还是
labor, and we are
是
also
比较高的，
advancing
但是还
gender
是有很大潜
equality.
力，
So we
是吧？
see
就是劳
greater
动力数量
potential
本身就
in
有
this
很大的潜
area.
力，
in the physical number of the laborers. Migrant workers, we still have 288 million. That is a big number. Those people are currently working, and if we take into account their relatives, the figure is even higher. And some people are working away from their household, are not registered in the place where they were born. In 2020, we want to make sure that the migrant workers can get registered in cities where they work and become permanent residents. So there is an issue of the location of working and the birth. Floating population. As China's midland and western provinces are developing, more and more Chinese companies and companies that are investing in southeast coastal areas are going to the middle and western part of China, driven by the development potential and the business opportunities, and encouraged by the policy to support those regions. And migrant workers, some of them are returning to their hometown to get employed and to get employed in the secondary and tertiary industries. That is a trend emerging in China as well. And also there is an elevated professionalism and level of skill of our labor force. And every year we have over 8 million college and university graduates. So the quality of China's, or the caliber of Chinese labor force is increasing, and that will lead to greater dividends. That's what I mentioned, what I mean by human resources or talent dividends. So there are good fundamentals which will continue to be the case. Thank you.
Infrastructure investment was very strong early this year. And in Q4, the growth rate climbed up compared with previous 3 quarters. So what are the impact of infrastructure investment on the economic growth? And what are the areas that you are working on in terms of strengthening weak links? That is a very good question. In recent years, compared with consumption indices, investment indices performed relatively weak. In 2018, according to the instructions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, we need to prioritize the weak links in supply-side structural reform, because there are many weak areas that we need to work on. Although, on the whole, China is the second largest economy, but there is imbalance of development, and there is huge disparities between different industries and areas. Infrastructure remains an important area for us to strengthen. In the second half of last year, we have intensified our efforts to strengthen the weak links. So infrastructure investment was growing for 4 months in a row. In terms of the secondary industry is mainly about manufacturing, infrastructure, and others. And infrastructure, compared with industrial investment, is weaker. There are many factors contributing to that. But on the whole, strengthening infrastructure development, especially in order to improve the consumer environment, revitalize the countryside and agriculture, and to further implement the regional development strategy. It is an important task. We have now advanced expressways, but per capita infrastructure stock is significantly lower than that of developed countries in terms of airports. If you compare the number of airports we have with the US and European countries, it's still quite low. The distance between the trunk transport line with households is still big. City infrastructure, urban infrastructure that are serving the people directly, for example, hot water, how many households have that? So there is still a sizable gap and a big task in front of us. In terms of the priority areas, relocation as a means to counter poverty remains an important task for us. We need to provide infrastructure for the millions of people who are being relocated. And we need to renovate their housing. These are all important work. In agriculture, water conservancy and irrigation, these are important for our strategy to revitalize countryside and agriculture. Major water conservancy projects are not yet put in place for the 13th five-year plan. The water resources are unevenly distributed in China in terms of transport between cities, city clusters. We are now encountering the same problem as developed countries. When holiday comes, it's difficult to get in or get out of a city because the number of vehicles owned exceeded 200 million now. These numbers look good, but we are seeing many traffic problems brought by that. In developed countries, you may see some 10-lane roads, but when it comes to the countryside and underdeveloped areas, the roads are not as good. More than 60% of our population now live in urban areas. The cities are growing very fast, but the transport is also improving very fast, but still we have rush hour traffic jams. These are all directly affecting people's lives. These are the weak links we need to work on. It is estimated that this year investment will be stronger than last year, in line with our policy. Thank you. This is the end of today's briefing. Thank you, Mr. Ning. Thank you, everyone.
That was a press conference by China's State Council Information Office, where a statistics official briefed the media on China's economic performance last year. Excuse me. To help us break down the numbers is Professor Zhang Gong at the University of International Business and Economics. Professor, thank you so much for staying with us throughout the press conference.
Yeah.
Let's start with the number that everyone was watching out for, 6.6% GDP growth last year. And it was also the first time China's economic